turn on notifications and never miss the beginning of a new story again. Join us and be part of every chapter. In the remote village of Vale Sereno, crushed by the oppressive shadow of the misty forest, lived Elias, a young man whose soul burned with a longing that the simplicity of pastoral life could not quench. His heart, recklessly pure, felt the weight of an imposed insignificance, the bitter sensation that the Eternal had granted him dreams too vast for his tiny world. This dissatisfaction was not lust, but rather the intimate certainty of an unfulfilled calling, a distant echo of a greater destiny that raged beyond the mountains. The community, bound to its routine and the ancestral fear of the forest, saw Elias's curiosity as the seed of disobedience and ruin, keeping him on the margins, a lonely stranger in his own home. The subtle humiliation, the veiled contempt of the elders for his head in the clouds, was his first and most poignant trial, a desert of recognition where his faith in something more needed to blossom. He carried the yoke of incomprehension and the forbidden forest. The misty woods became the mirror of his soul, a place feared and paradoxically the only promise of truth he dared to pursue. And so, on a grey afternoon, when the mist crept like a shroud over the hills, Elias felt the uncontrollable urge, the silent voice that was not his own and yet pulled him toward the abyss. It was an ancestral whisper that to others would be the voice of doom, but to Elias it sounded like the melody of a prophecy. Ignoring the disapproving gaze of his village and the silent weeping of his faithful friend Lyra, he advanced into the damp darkness of the forest that promised to swallow all who dared cross its threshold. The elders feared the grove, for they saw it as the domain of ancient spirits and curses that punished human arrogance. For them, crossing the barrier of trees was an act of defiance against the established order, a direct challenge to the designs that kept the world under a safe tedium. But Elijah, moved by a nascent faith in hidden beauty and not in punishment, felt that true disobedience would be to deny the calling that burned in his soul, the manifestation of his search for the truth that had been denied him. What he found in the beating heart of the misty forest was not the hell that fairy tales prophesied, but a spectacle of such forbidden beauty that it wounded his eyes with the shock of glory. It was Sapphira, the talking serpent, a legendary creature whose scales captured the rarefied light and returned it in a kaleidoscope of iridescent colors, shifting from a protective emerald green to a melancholic cobalt blue. The sight alone was enough to bring any mortal to their knees, but what followed shattered the paradigms of his childhood. The serpent's voice, unfolding with the gravity of an oracle and the subtle irony of a master, struck Elias like a revelation. She was not a monster, but a being imprisoned by the cruelty of ignorance, and her ordeal echoed Elias's own loneliness. The serpent, which in the cosmogony of his faith was the symbol of primordial temptation, ironically became the first being to see his soul clearly, revealing that trials sometimes take terrible forms to test the essence of fidelity. Elias felt terror and attraction clashing in his chest, a battle between blind obedience to the dogmas of his village and loyalty to the truth that manifested itself before his eyes. Sapphira, wounded and vulnerable, an irony for such a legendary being, revealed that he was the key to breaking the cycle of persecution that held her captive, a crucial link to an event that would redefine the harmony between the realm of men and the hidden realm. This was his first and monumental temptation of faith, to trust the creature who, for millennia, had been portrayed as the embodiment of deceit and evil, or to retreat to the safety of ignorance and obedience to men. The Eternal, it seemed, had a peculiar method of testing his servants, and his superior will was now manifesting itself through a being who symbolized sin itself, forcing Elias to look beyond form and discern the essence of suffering and hidden design. The shock of the revelation of divine purpose, which now involved the talking serpent and the fate of Vale Sereno, was quickly followed by the appearance of a more tangible and, in a way, more terrifying obstacle, Master Orion, the guardian of the forest, whose age seemed to have been sculpted by time itself. Orion was not a man, but an entity of ancient seriousness, a silver-bearded prophet whose eyes burned with the fire of warnings. He emerged from the mist as the personification of the ancient and unbreakable law, a herald of orthodoxy who saw in the unholy union between the youth and the legendary creature, the harbinger of destruction. His voice was low and heavy, not with malice, but with the pain of one who had seen empires fall through disobedience. Turn away from the serpent, boy. It is not the salvation you seek, but the deception. That will lead you to ruin. It is the reminder of an old mistake, and the hand of the Eternal, if his warnings are not heeded, will rise against you, he proclaimed, tormented by indignation and the fear that history would repeat itself. The pain in Elias's soul intensified, for Master Orion represented everything he had been taught to respect: authority, wisdom, and order. The guardian, with his aura of sanctity and forbidden knowledge, forced Elias into a conflict of loyalties that was, in essence, the deepest trial of faith. On one side, the voice of tradition and fear personified by the venerable Orion; on the other, the voice of newfound truth and compassion, manifested by the enigmatic Sapphira. The young man, feeling the weight of Orion's penetrating gaze, knelt not in submission to the warning, but in silent prayer for the wisdom to discern the true will of the Almighty. He knew that blind obedience to fear was not the same as fidelity, and the malice that Orion attributed to the serpent seemed absent in his suffering, forcing Elias to reject superficial appearances and seek the face of justice. In this test of faith, Lyra's appearance was the breath of humanity and loyalty that prevented Elijah from succumbing to doubt. The young woman, whose bravery was inversely proportional to her stature, followed her friend into the heart of the mist, not out of curiosity, but out of unwavering devotion to his soul. She did not fear Orion's judgment or Sapphira's dark reputation. Her only fear was that Elijah would be lost in the darkness. "If your soul tells you that this creature is suffering, then our destiny is not to flee, but to help," she declared, with a firmness that surprised everyone, including the austere Orion. The alliance, therefore, was sealed not under sacred oaths, but under the simple and pure law of loyal friendship, a virtue that higher destiny always favors. Lyra's presence not only shared Elijah's burden, but also provided the necessary confirmation that compassion, even in the face of taboo, was the path laid out for his and Sapphira's redemption. From that solemn moment, Elias's destiny ceased to be that of a dreamy boy and transformed into that of a reluctant guardian, the protagonist of a saga that would challenge the history of his village. Sapphira's ordeal was physical. She had been wounded by ignorant hunters who feared her power and wisdom. But Elias's ordeal was spiritual, a journey to unravel the secret of the serpent, and by extension his own. Sapphira, with a tone of epic melancholy, revealed fragments of a forgotten past, a time when creatures and humans lived under an alliance of mutual respect, an order that Master Orion tried to maintain, but which the ignorance of men had corrupted. Triumph, Sapphira whispered, did not reside in defeating an enemy, but in restoring the lost link, and for that, Elias needed to find the Fountain of Truth, a mythical place that promised balm for the serpent's wounds and enlightenment for the young man's soul. The journey that followed was not a joyful adventure, but a forced exodus from their comfort zone, a slow and perilous march through the heart of the misty forest, where each step was a test of faith in Sapphira's loyalty. The serpent, unable to move quickly, was carried in an improvised litter by Elijah and Lyra, a symbol of their obedience to the call of compassion. The nights were cold and filled with terror, where the noises of the forest transformed into the accusing voices of the village, and doubt, like a penetrating frost, tried to freeze Elijah's resolve. The Eternal seemed silent, his invisible hand testing the young man's persistence in the darkness. They faced deprivation and hunger, but with each obstacle overcome, the strength of Elijah's faith and Lyra's devotion multiplied, transforming physical hardship into spiritual nourishment. Meanwhile, the shadow of Master Orion loomed over them, no longer as an enemy, but as the stern guardian who, with his stubbornness, forced Elias to rely solely on his faith and discernment. Orion, in truth, did not desire the young man's downfall, but feared the manifestation of the ancient error that the serpent represented. From his perspective, Sapphira was the personification of vanity and deceit, a creature that promised knowledge in exchange for downfall, and his pursuit was motivated by a profound love for the order and innocence of Veil Sereno. He, the guardian of the law, was the first antagonist that Elias needed to overcome, not by force, but by proving the purity of his intentions. The Master, with his omnipresent presence, acted as the unwitting instrument of providence, ensuring that Elias's journey was purified of all worldly motivation and guided only by the desire for justice. Weeks passed in a slow and agonizing journey where the limits of physical and spiritual endurance were stretched to the utmost. Lyra, with her unwavering practicality, was the mainstay of the pair, the anchor that kept Elias grounded in reality when Sapphira's enigmas threatened to shipwreck him in fantasy. The serpent, in moments of clarity, revealed not only secrets of the forest, but also the deepest motivations of men, the malice disguised as Orion, and the seed of greatness hidden in Elias's heart. She spoke of a past in which humanity, seduced by false promises of power, broke the covenant, with the forces of nature, and how her own wound was a reflection of the world's wound, a schism that only the restoration of pure trust could heal. This revelation of divine purpose, which united his destiny with that of all creation, inflamed Elias's determination, transforming the ordeal into a priesthood. The climax of the first phase of the journey arrived at the foot of a forbidden mountain, where the fountain of truth, a lake of crystalline waters guarded by ancient runes, radiated a light that transfigured the mist. The place was the abode of the final great test. The serpent needed to plunge into these waters, but the path was guarded by a magical barrier that could only be broken by an act of total and unrestricted fidelity. What followed was not a duel of swords, but a silent battle of wills. Orion, who had followed them closely, appeared as an imposing figure demanding that Elias abandon the serpent. The Guardian, moved by sincere indignation and ingrained skepticism, warned that Sapphira's touch would contaminate the sacred waters and bring an unprecedented curse upon the village, revealing his deep fear that the serpent was in fact an agent of perdition. Elias felt the weight of history and prophecy on his young shoulders, the pain of the choice that pitted the ancestral wisdom of Master Orion against his new and powerful conviction. This was not a moment for doubt, but for the unwavering act of faith that would define his destiny. He looked at Sapphira, whose iridescent scales seemed to plead for mercy, and saw not deception, but the fragility of wounded creation. He looked at Lyra, who nodded to him in a gesture of blind and heroic trust. And finally, he looked at Master Orion, whose eyes burned with sincere stubbornness, and knew that divine justice was not measured by superficial obedience to dogma, but by the courage to follow the voice of compassion amidst accusation. It was time to reject fear and embrace the truth of his heart. With a determination that seemed to have aged his soul by decades, Elias stepped forward, gripping Sapphira's litter firmly, ready to shatter the magical barrier with the sheer force of his loyalty. The moment of triumph fidelity was dramatic and electrifying. When Elias touched the barrier of runes, there was no explosion or curse, but a manifestation of light that swept through the mist and struck Orion with the force of a silent judgment. The force field, which represented the ancient separation between the worlds, dissipated like smoke in the sun, proving that the purity of his purpose and unconditional loyalty to the wounded creature were the long-lost key. Elias and Lyra, with a final effort, carried the serpent to the edge of the fountain of truth. Orion's skepticism turned to shock and finally to a dark regret as he realized that his blind fidelity to the law had almost condemned the truth. He silently witnessed Sapphira plunge into the luminous waters whose waves were not contaminated, but on the contrary, shimmered with a new and intense life, showing that true redemption had begun. What emerged from the fountain was not merely a healed serpent, but a transfigured and glorious Sapphira, her scales now gleaming with the gold and white of the pure covenant. Her voice, once ironic and enigmatic, became resonant and filled with the authority of an oracle. The transformation was the culmination of the revelation of divine purpose. Sapphira was not the curse, but the legacy and prophecy of an era of harmony. She was the guardian of the memory of lost unity and Elijah, the link that through his faith had restored that memory. The serpent, now in full strength, raised its head and uttered a prophecy of transformation over the serene valley, saying that true light would not come from the temples of men, but from the courage of a heart that refused to judge by appearances. Elijah's act had proven that compassion was the highest form of obedience. The contrast between the before and after of the ordeal was startling. Elias, who had set out as a lonely and humiliated boy, shackled by the incomprehension of his village, was now clothed in an authority that surpassed that of Master Orion. His journey had not given him worldly power, but the undeniable wisdom of one who walked in darkness and found the light through fidelity to an unpopular calling. Master Orion, the guardian of law and tradition, was the first to bow, not to Elias, but to the manifestation of divine justice that revealed itself through his humility. His previous indignation transformed into profound repentance, for he recognized that fear had clouded his vision. The triumph was complete. Not only was Sapphira healed, but the guardian's heart had been redeemed from the blindness of orthodoxy, and Elias had inevitably fulfilled the promise that had burned in his soul from the beginning. The return of Elias, Lyra, and Sapphira to Vale Sereno was not that of fugitives, but of heralds of a new era. They did not descend the mountains in martial triumph, but in majestic silence, with Master Orion walking at a respectful distance behind them, the weight of his recent blindness and subsequent redemption bowing his shoulders. The village, which had previously cast scornful and judgmental glances upon the young dreamer, now watched the procession with a paralyzing mixture of awe, skepticism, and fascination. They saw not only the serpent, whose transfigured glory was impossible to ignore, but also the face of Elias, which now radiated the peace of one who had faced the shadow and embraced the higher purpose. The villagers' initial shock and disbelief were palpable, for the sight of their prophecy and their fear manifesting in a form of redeeming beauty was a direct blow to their comfortable order. The definitive turning point in the soul of the village came with the solemn and public testimony of Master Orion. The guardian, who had been the beacon of its tradition and the herald of its caution, stopped in the central square, knelt before Elias and Sapphira, and pleaded for forgiveness for his arrogance and skepticism. With a choked voice which resonated with the weight of his authority and his repentance, he declared to all that the serpent was not perdition, but the catalyst of divine justice, and that Elias, the humblest and most despised of all, was the instrument chosen by the Eternal to restore the covenant. This act of humility, coming from the most revered figure, broke the final resistance of hardened hearts. The redemption of the village began not with a miracle of fire, but with the sincere confession of its leader, who understood that the true law was not the fear of the serpent, but fidelity to the inner voice of compassion. Sapphira, the talking serpent and guardian of memory, sealed the legacy with a great prophecy of transformation. Towering above the heads of the astonished crowd, she spoke of the importance of reconnecting with the misty grove and recognizing that all of creation was interconnected, a fundamental principle forgotten by humanity in its arrogant pursuit of dominion. She did not impose new laws, but reminded them of the ancient law of reverence. The serene valley would no longer be a place of fear and isolation, but the epicenter of a new era of harmony. Elias, the ancient dreamer, did not seek titles or power, but accepted the role of mediator, the link between the two worlds, the shepherd of a new flock, whose staff was the wisdom gained through trial. The glory of his elevation lay not in sitting on a throne, but in being recognized as the man of unwavering faith. The ultimate triumph was not merely Sapphira's healing or Elijah's honor, but the total transformation of the atmosphere in Vale Sereno. The village, which had lived under the yoke of fear and petty judgment, flourished under the new light of redemption. The ordeal had purified the people. They had seen the vivid contrast, the humiliation of the young man and the suffering of the serpent, transformed into the glory of a new covenant and the honor of a fulfilled destiny. Initial skepticism gave way to profound reverence, and the story of Elijah and the talking serpent became the village's epic tale, an ancestral chronicle to be told to children's children, not to instill fear, but to inspire faith in the inevitable manifestation of divine justice through compassionate obedience. The young man who sought his purpose had found it, and his legacy was lasting peace. The transformation of Vale Sereno did not happen overnight, but was a slow and irreversible process of re-educating the heart, overseen by the combined wisdom of Elias, Sapphira, and the repentant Master Orion. The presence of the talking serpent, once the personification of taboo, became a constant reminder of human frailty and the need for discernment. Sapphira, with the majesty of her new golden scales, often nestled near the fountain of truth, not as an idol, but as the silent guardian of the new alliance. Her voice was now the oracle of harmony, and her words were listened to with reverence by the villagers who had once feared them. Ancestral fear had been replaced by profound respect, and with that, the gates of the misty grove were opened, not for exploitation, but for humble communion. The figure of Elijah, however, most profoundly exemplified the power of redemption through faith. He did not become a king or a priest in silken robes, but a mediator, a peacemaker between the simplicity of the village and the complexity of the hidden world. If you're enjoying this story, take a second. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and let's continue with this exciting adventure. His life was a historical chronicle that true authority is granted not by birth, but by enduring trials. He dedicated his days to teaching the villagers, especially the young, to look beyond the surface, not to judge by appearances, and to listen to the subtle voice of truth even when it came in unexpected forms, like that of a legendary serpent. The before of his life, the solitude and humiliation, served as the stark contrast that enhanced the after, his elevation to a position of honor and wisdom. Lyra, the faithful friend, also became a fundamental piece in the legacy. Her unwavering loyalty to Elijah, even when reason and fear screamed otherwise, proved to be a virtue as potent as faith itself. She became the voice of practicality and common sense amidst Sapphira's revelations, ensuring that the new covenant was founded not on empty mysticism, but on concrete acts of respect for nature and justice. Her role was that of an anchor, a constant reminder that the greatest of ages needs simple devotion to sustain itself, and that pure friendship, like theirs, was the most visible manifestation of higher grace. Destiny, which initially seemed to focus only on Elijah, had also honored her selfless loyalty. Master Orion, consumed by his repentance and motivated by a new and humble devotion, assumed the role of chronicler of the new era. His mission was to ensure that the epic tale of trial, fidelity, and triumph was preserved in its purest form, without the embellishments of superstition, but with all the solemnity of historical fact. He narrated in vivid detail his own skepticism, his sincere indignation, and the shock of his epiphany at the fountain of truth, always underlining the role of divine justice that manifested itself to correct his myopic view of the law. His words were living proof that even the most rigid of traditions can be redeemed by truth, and his testimony was the foundation of the unwavering faith that now moved Vale Sereno. Elias's trial did not end with Sapphira's healing, but took on a new form, the administration of peace and the mediation of conflicts that arose when new knowledge clashed with old habits. Many villagers, still trapped in a mentality of fear and distrust, viewed the new alliance as a license for recklessness, seeking to exploit the secrets of the misty woods for personal gain. Testing the limits of the serpent's and the guardian's patience, Elias, with the wisdom gained in the solitude of his journey, treated each transgression not as a crime, but as a failure of understanding. He used the tale of his own initial blindness and subsequent redemption to guide the straying, proving that true leadership is an extension of service and patience. The legacy's influence began to spread beyond the mountains of Vale Sereno. Travelers and merchants passing through the village, drawn by tales of the talking serpent and the young guardian, carried with them not only goods, but also the prophecy of a new order, where faith and nature coexisted in mutual respect. Distant kingdoms, which had previously looked down on the isolated village, now sent emissaries, curious to witness the truth behind the rumors. They came with skepticism and arrogance, but left with the seed of doubt planted in their souls, confronted by the evidence of the harmony and prosperity that the redemption had brought. Elijah's triumph was, therefore, a manifestation that extended beyond his valley, fulfilling the promise that the humble would be raised to enlighten the nations. Sapphira, the wise woman of the New Age, revealed to Elijah the secrets of creation, not to empower him, but to equip him for his mission as restorer. She taught him about the cycles of the forest, the language of the waters, and the vital breath that united all things. This knowledge was proof that the trial had been divine training, preparing him for a role of cosmic responsibility. He understood that the serpent's wound was a metaphor for humanity's wound, separation from the source of life, and that Sapphira's healing was a call to heal the human soul itself. Elijah's profound motivation, which had previously been a personal quest for purpose, now aligned perfectly with the higher design of universal restoration. The contrast between Elias's current life and his former life as a dreamy and humiliated young man was at the heart of the entire narrative. The boy who felt abandoned and misunderstood was now at the center of a new story, venerated not for strength or wealth, but for his unwavering faithfulness amidst the most difficult of trials. His initial solitude was the necessary preparation for him to bear the weight of truth without becoming corrupted. Every admiring glance from the villagers and every act of humility from Master Orion was a vivid reminder of divine justice in action, which rescued the despised and raised him to glory. Elias's triumph was the inevitable fulfillment of a predetermined destiny, a chronicle that persistence in faith always results in the manifestation of the promise. The alliance with the misty grove was not a treaty signed on parchment, but a living promise, sealed by Elijah's respect and constant vigilance. He did not allow the forest to be defiled by unrestrained exploitation, but guided the villagers to interact with it with reverence, harvesting only what was necessary and offering silent gratitude in return. This discipline demanded continuous effort and unwavering faith in the serpent's wisdom, which often clashed with human impatience and greed. His main trial now was to maintain the purity of the redemption he had gained, protecting the village not from external enemies, but from the corrosion of his own fallen nature, a task that required more patience and wisdom than any sword fight. Lyra, the eternal companion, found her own significant role in the new order, becoming the guardian of the village. Children, she told them the epic tale of Elias and Sapphira with the passion of one who had lived the saga, ensuring that the legacy was passed down not only as a legend, but as a practical lesson in courage and loyalty. She narrated the journey, the fear, and the attraction, emphasizing Elias's choice to trust in compassion instead of condemnation. Her voice, sweet and firm, ensured that the next generation would grow up with an inherent understanding of the interconnectedness of all life and the justice that favors the faithful. She was the guardian of innocence and the vivid memory of fidelity. Master Orion, after his profound humiliation and repentance, dedicated himself to writing the chronicle, but with a new perspective. His texts were no longer somber warnings, but eloquent celebrations of the manifestation of divine purpose through human weakness. He delved into ancient scriptures and prophecies, discovering that the coming of a humble mediator who would unite with the taboo to save creation was foretold in forgotten codes, which magnified the triumph of Elijah and gave it the seal of sacred inevitability. His life, once marked by rigidity, found redemption in humble service to the truth he had almost condemned, a powerful testament to the transformative capacity of the human spirit when confronted by grace. The solemnity of Elijah's destiny did not distance him from his humanity. Though honored and consulted, he remained simple in his habits, wearing the rustic clothes of a shepherd, a living reminder of where the Eternal had rescued him from. He refused to be idolized, diverting praise to the higher principle that guided his steps: divine justice. The contrast was striking and deliberate. The power of truth is not manifested in pomp, but in persistent humility. His account was an epic of redemption, where the malice of skeptics and the pain of abandonment dissolved in the light of a fulfilled purpose, ensuring that Elijah's triumph seemed, with each passing year, less an isolated miracle and more the inevitable manifestation of the promise. Over the years, the mist that once hung over the grove, fueling fear and superstition, began to dissipate, symbolizing the clarity that the new alliance brought to the minds of the villagers. The grove, though still mysterious, was no longer a place of perdition, but a source of sustenance and a temple of contemplation. Elias, in his daily routine, continued to walk along the edges of the forest, his presence being the living guarantee that the promise of harmony was being kept. His most subtle trial was vigilance against boredom and familiarity, the silent enemies of faith, which threatened to transform Sapphira's miracle and his own journey into a common legend, emptied of its transformative power. Legacy began to crystallize into rituals and customs that celebrated humility and interconnectedness. The fountain of truth became a center of pilgrimage, not for the worship of Sapphira, but for the renewal of commitment to faithfulness and compassion. The travelers who arrived no longer sought gold or power, but the wisdom of Elijah and the silent witness of Sapphira. The young man, now a mature man, spoke in parables that linked the story of his ordeal to the daily needs of the people, teaching that every act of kindness, however small, was an extension of the epic triumph he had achieved. Sapphira, the wise woman of the new age, rarely spoke, for her presence was enough to convey the revelation of divine purpose. However, when she did speak, it was with an authority that silenced even the winds of the forest. She warned Elijah against complacency and pride, reminding him that true triumph was a continuous state of vigilance and service. Her words were the anchor that kept Elijah's perspective aligned with the higher design, preventing honor from corrupting him. The relationship between the serpent and the guardian was a powerful paradox. The symbol of the original temptation now served as the guardian of Elijah's highest virtue. Master Orion, in his final years, witnessed divine justice in its fullness. He not only witnessed the redemption of Vale Sereno, but also the expansion of the influence of Elias, the boy he had almost condemned. He finalized the ancient chronicle, giving it the title Epic of the Humble Guardian, where the contrast between the village's initial skepticism and its ultimate glory was the central theme. His final paragraphs were a hymn to the manifestation of the Almighty, celebrating the fact that the glory of the promise always surpasses the suffering of trial, and that Elias's destiny was the inevitable fulfillment of a greater plan. His death was not one of mourning, but of satisfaction, for he left behind the written proof of a miracle of faith. Years passed. Time, which seemed to behave strangely in the misty grove, flowed inexorably over the serene valley, transforming Elijah's epic saga into a cornerstone of its culture. The children Lyra had taught grew up to become the pillars of the community, and Elijah's faithfulness to truth became the standard of morality. The village refused to fall again into pettiness and hasty judgment, having learned dramatically that appearance, prejudice, and rigid tradition were the true sources of its trial. The seed of faith planted by Elijah, amidst solitude and humiliation, had become a forest of wisdom and tolerance. The power of Elijah's triumph lay in the fact that he never yielded to the temptation to use his authority to oppress or seek revenge against those who had despised him. On the contrary, he served them with unwavering humility, proving that divine justice is not manifested in punishment, but in the elevation of the spirit and the restoration of dignity. His life was a silent prophecy, a living gospel that true glory is achieved through perseverance in goodness and the refusal to abandon compassion, even when the voice of tradition and fear demands condemnation. Elijah's alliance with Sapphira was the heart of the valley's prosperity. The serpent, with its ancient wisdom, ensured the balance of nature's cycles, and the land, blessed by mutual respect, produced abundant harvests and crystal-clear waters. The contrast between the scarcity and fear of the before and the abundance and peace of the after was the most eloquent testament to divine purpose fulfilled. The serene valley became a living parable for neighboring kingdoms, a vivid reminder that true wealth lies not in accumulation, but in harmony. Elijah's legacy was peace, cemented by his courage to be different. In his final days, Elijah withdrew to the fountain of truth alongside Sapphira for a final moment of contemplation. The faithful liar, who remained by his side until the end, witnessed the stillness of his spirit. He did not fear the end, for his life had been the inevitable fulfillment of a promise that began in pain and ended in glory. He had lived the redemption in body and soul. His departure, a calm and majestic event, solidified his status not as a man, but as an archetype of faith. His destiny, which began with the humiliation of scorn, culminated in the silent glory of a fulfilled purpose, ensuring that his tale would become the ultimate epic of fidelity and divine triumph. After Elijah's departure, the covenant did not waver, for it was engraved not in stone, but in the hearts and daily practices of the people of Vale Sereno. Lyra, with the wisdom acquired throughout a life of faithfulness and service, assumed the mantle of storyteller and guardian of Elijah's memory. She narrated the historical chronicle with an emotional intensity that made listeners relive Elijah's initial solitude, his indignation against Orion, and the shock of Sapphira's revelation. She ensured that the epic was understood as a moral guide, proof that glory lies in perseverance in the face of adversity and scorn. Sapphira, the talking serpent, remained at the fountain of truth, but her golden glory diminished slightly, transforming into a soft, steady glow, a symbol of the tranquility that followed the great triumph. She was no longer the central figure of the saga, but the eternal witness to the fulfillment of prophecy and divine justice. Her silence was her greatest lesson. Truth does not need to shout to be heard. Its mere presence is an undeniable testament to restored order. Her life was the embodiment of Elijah's legacy, a guarantee that the purity of intention would forever be protected. The tale of Elijah and the talking serpent began to permeate the myths and songs of distant kingdoms, transforming the humble, serene valley into a beacon of hope and redemption. Kings and philosophers sent their young men there, not to learn the art of war or politics, but to contemplate harmony and purpose. They returned transformed, understanding that true strength does not reside in dominion, but in alliance with creation and in humility of heart. Master Orion, even after his death, continued to guide, for his epic of the humble guardian was copied and studied, being the most powerful testimony that arrogance and skepticism are the greatest enemies of truth. The main trial for the new generation was not to be content with the legacy, but to renew it in every act. Elijah had taught them that faith was not a passive inheritance, but an active choice in every moment. They remembered the vivid contrast, the barren land of fear before and the fertility of confidence after, and this memory was their shield against forgetfulness and complacency. The manifestation of divine purpose was celebrated annually with festivals of gratitude, where the story of Elijah's trial was reenacted with solemnity and drama, ensuring that the trauma and the glory were never forgotten. Elijah's moral authority, perpetuated throughout his history, was a constant counterpoint to human ambition. Young leaders were reminded that Elijah did not seek power, but rather truth, and that power was given to him as a consequence of his faithfulness. They understood that true honor was a burden of responsibility, not a privilege of ostentation. Elijah's absence was more eloquent than his presence, for his triumph had become a universal principle, a testament that the despised and marginalized can be the chosen instruments to accomplish the greatest of works. The epic of Elijah was rich in emotion. It evoked indignation against the injustice and malice of the judgment, the profound pain of loneliness and abandonment, and finally, immense satisfaction and reverence for the intervention of a higher purpose. The narrators, guided by the teachings of Lyra and the writings of Orion, did not fear exaggerating the drama, for the account needed to reach the soul, forcing the listener to immerse themselves in Elijah's journey to feel the majesty of redemption. The contrast between before and after was the backbone of the entire narrative, the map for spiritual transformation. The figure of Sapphira, the serpent, came to be seen in distant kingdoms as a symbol of wisdom and revelation, and no longer of deception. This transformation in perception was the ultimate proof of Elijah's triumph. He not only saved a creature, but redeemed an ancient symbol, reversing the centuries-old paradigm. The prophecy that balance would be restored was fulfilled on all levels, proving that the faith of a single heart could rewrite history and purify even the darkest archetypes. Legacy was, essentially, a belief in the virtue of listening and compassion. He taught that divine justice was not a lightning bolt striking enemies, but the manifestation of truth that corrects error and elevates the humble. His life was a melodramatic epic where each tear of his initial ordeal was rewarded with a decade of silent glory, ensuring that the reader felt the inevitability of his destiny, the glorious fulfillment of the promise made to the young man who dared to enter the grove. The village of Vale Sereno never again knew poverty of spirit or petty ignorance. They became the guardians of the new covenant, the perpetuators of Elijah's faithfulness, and their prosperity was the visible testimony of the power of redemption. They knew that their peace did not come from the walls, but from the purity of their faith, a gift won through the suffering and perseverance of a young man who refused to accept the destiny imposed upon him. And so the historical chronicle of Elias, the humble guardian, and Sapphira, the redeemed serpent, endured through the ages. It was a tale that began with profound loneliness and the humiliation of scorn and culminated in the eternal glory of purpose fulfilled, ensuring that their legacy would be a perennial source of inspiration, a prophecy that the path to divine triumph is always open to those who choose compassion and truth amidst the darkest of trials. Justice was done, the despised was exalted, and the promise was gloriously fulfilled. Do you want more Bible stories filled with faith, teachings, and heartwarming moments? Subscribe and turn on notifications to follow us with each new story.